She died in his arms at 11:47 p.m., and the last thing she whispered wasn't goodbye, it was take care of our daughter. Nobody in that hospital room expected a love story to end that way. But it did. And the woman responsible for it never spent a single night in a jail cell. My name is Daniel Cross, and this is the story of how I lost the only woman I ever truly loved, and how the person who took her from me is still walking free somewhere in the world, sleeping peacefully while I can't close my eyes without seeing her face. Before I continue, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now for you. If you're new here, subscribe now, because this story will break your heart in ways you don't expect. Let's begin. I need to take you back to where it all started, because you can't understand the ending without understanding the beginning. Her name was Sophie Grant, and she worked as a housemaid in my family's mansion in Los Angeles. Quiet, hard-working, the kind of person who said thank you to everyone, even people who never bothered to learn her name. I was engaged to a woman named Victoria Lane at the time. Beautiful on the outside, cold on the inside, though I didn't fully understand how cold until the morning she threw a pot of boiling coffee across the kitchen and onto Sophie's arm and chest over something as small as a scheduling mix-up with a caterer. I walked in right as it happened. Sophie was on the floor, screaming, skin burning, and Victoria was standing there with the empty pot still in her hand, more worried about how it looked than how much pain she'd caused. I called off the engagement that same week. I couldn't unsee what I saw. I couldn't pretend the woman I almost married was capable of something so cruel and just move on like nothing happened. Over the months that followed, while Sophie healed, something between us grew into something neither of us expected. Quiet dinners turned into long conversations. Long conversations turned into feelings we couldn't ignore anymore. 6 months later, I asked her to marry me in the same garden where Victoria once planned her wedding, and Sophie said yes with tears streaming down her face. Victoria didn't take it well. She disappeared from public life for a while after the engagement ended, and I foolishly believed that meant she had moved on. I believed the worst was over. I was wrong. 3 months into our marriage, strange things started happening. A car came out of nowhere and clipped Sophie's bumper on a rainy night, spinning her across 3 lanes of traffic. She walked away with just a sprained wrist, and we told ourselves it was a random accident, because believing anything else felt too frightening to accept. Then our head of security found the brake lines on her car cut, just enough to fail within minutes of driving. That's when we knew. That's when the fear became real and impossible to ignore. We hired a private investigator, a sharp, careful woman named Diane Foster. It took her weeks of digging through shell accounts and phone records, but she finally found the connection we feared. Victoria was behind it. All of it. We didn't have enough solid proof yet to go to the police without risking Victoria slipping away on a technicality, so Diane told us to be patient, to keep gathering evidence quietly while staying alert. I regret that decision every single day of my life. Because while we were being careful, being patient, being smart, Victoria was already planning something bigger. Something we never saw coming until it was far too late. It happened at a charity gala downtown, the same kind of glamorous event where I first watched Victoria smile for cameras like nothing in the world could touch her. Sophie was 7 weeks pregnant that night, glowing despite everything we'd been through, laughing with friends near the dessert table in a soft blue dress she had picked out just for the occasion. A waiter approached her with a glass of sparkling water. My head of security, Frank, caught it just in time, pulling her hand back before she could drink it. Security tackled the waiter before he made it out the door, and under questioning, he confessed everything. Victoria had paid him to slip something into her drink that would end the pregnancy and cause internal bleeding severe enough to be deadly. We thought that was the moment everything would finally end. We thought, surely, this confession, combined with everything Diane had gathered, would be enough to put Victoria away for good. But somebody tipped her off. To this day, we don't know who. Maybe someone on her payroll inside the police department. Maybe someone inside our own security team we trusted. Whoever it was, Victoria found out about the confession less than 2 hours after it happened, and by the time police arrived at her penthouse with an arrest warrant, she was already gone. She had chartered a private jet earlier that same week, almost like she knew this moment was coming, like some part of her sensed the walls closing in even before the waiter confessed. By the time investigators tracked the flight records, Victoria Lane had already landed somewhere outside of United States jurisdiction, in a country with no extradition agreement willing to send her back for trial. She vanished into wealth and borders that money could buy, leaving behind a country full of evidence against her and absolutely nobody able to touch her. I remember standing in my living room that night, staring at Diane as she explained, very carefully, very gently, that there was nothing more the police could do. Victoria was gone. Untouchable. Free. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. But Sophie, 7 weeks pregnant and still shaking from what almost happened at that gala, took my hand and told me we would be okay. She told me love always finds a way to survive, no matter how ugly the world tries to be. I believed her. God, I wanted so badly to believe her. For a while, it seemed like maybe she was right. Months passed without incident. Sophie's pregnancy continued smoothly, and slowly, cautiously, we allowed ourselves to breathe again. We painted a nursery in soft yellow. We picked out a name. We let ourselves believe the worst chapter of our lives had finally closed. But danger doesn't always come wrapped in obvious warning signs. Sometimes it comes quietly, patiently, waiting in places you'd never think to look. 6 months into the pregnancy, Sophie started feeling unusually tired. Dizzy sometimes, more than what her doctor said was normal. We chalked it up to the exhaustion that comes with carrying a child, the kind every pregnant woman complains about at some point. Then one evening, she collapsed in our kitchen. I rushed her to the hospital, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel straight. Doctors ran test after test, their faces growing more serious with each result that came back. Finally, one of them pulled me aside into a small, quiet room that felt too much like the one where they deliver news nobody wants to hear. There are unusually high levels of a toxic substance in her bloodstream, the doctor said carefully. Something that's been building up slowly over the last several months. This isn't something that happens by accident. I felt my entire world tilt sideways. Someone had been poisoning Sophie for months. Small amounts. Slow enough to avoid suspicion, slow enough to look like nothing more than pregnancy exhaustion, until her body simply couldn't fight it anymore. We later discovered, through a private lab Diane rushed the samples to, that the substance had been introduced through Sophie's prenatal vitamins, a bottle that had been switched out weeks earlier during a delivery mix-up nobody thought twice about at the time. Diane traced the delivery back through records that led, once again, straight to a payment originating from an account connected to Victoria, managed remotely from wherever she was now hiding. Even from another country, even from behind borders no police force could cross, she had found a way to reach into our home and hurt the one person I loved more than my own life. The doctors fought for 11 days to save her. 11 days of machines beeping steadily beside her bed, 11 days of me sitting in that uncomfortable plastic chair refusing to leave, holding her hand, praying to a God I wasn't even sure was listening anymore. Our daughter was delivered early, at just over 7 months, small and fragile but alive, breathing on her own within the first few critical hours. We named her Grace, just like we always planned, because even in the middle of all that darkness, she felt like the one piece of light we had left. Sophie held her only once. Just once, for a few precious minutes, her arms too weak to hold on for long, her eyes fighting to stay open long enough to memorize every detail of her daughter's face. "I love you both so much," she whispered to me that night, her voice barely audible over the sound of the machines around us. "Take care of our daughter. Make sure she knows how much I loved her, even though I couldn't stay." I told her not to talk like that. I told her she was strong, that she would fight through this just like she fought through everything else Victoria threw at us. But somewhere deep down, I think we both already knew the truth that neither of us wanted to say out loud. She passed away at 11:47 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday night, with my hand wrapped around hers and our newborn daughter sleeping just a few feet away in a hospital bassinet, completely unaware that she would grow up never knowing her mother's voice, her laugh, or the warmth of her arms beyond that one brief, fleeting moment. I don't remember much about the days that followed. I remember the funeral being a blur of black clothing and quiet condolences from people who couldn't possibly understand what I had lost. I remember holding Grace against my chest, staring down at her tiny face, seeing pieces of Sophie in every single feature, and wondering how I was supposed to raise her alone. Victoria was never arrested. To this day, she remains somewhere overseas, protected by borders and money and a legal system too slow and too limited to reach her. Every few months, Diane still sends updates, tracking rumors of sightings in different countries, different cities, always staying one step ahead, always slipping through whatever narrow window of opportunity we manage to find. Some nights, I sit in Grace's nursery, the same soft yellow room Sophie helped paint with her own hands, rocking our daughter to sleep, and I think about how unfair this world can be. How someone as cruel and calculated as Victoria gets to live freely under warm skies somewhere, while someone as kind and gentle as Sophie is buried beneath cold ground in a cemetery I visit every single Sunday. Grace is 3 years old now. She has her mother's eyes, the same warm brown that used to look at me like I was the safest place in the world. Sometimes she asks me questions I don't know how to answer. Questions like, where did mommy go? And why can't she come back? And did mommy love me even though I never really got to know her? I tell her the truth, as gently as I can. I tell her that her mother loved her more than anything else in this entire world, that her final thoughts, her final words, were about making sure Grace grew up knowing that love. I tell her that some people in this world do terrible, unforgivable things, and sometimes, even when we do everything right, even when we fight as hard as we possibly can, we don't get the ending we deserve. I still search for Victoria sometimes, even now, years later. Not out of some desire for revenge, though there are nights that desire burns hotter than anything else inside me, but because I made a promise to Sophie in that hospital room, a promise that somehow, someday, justice would find its way back around, even if it took years, even if it took everything I had left to give. Diane still works the case quietly in the background, and every so often, we get closer. A financial trail here. A sighting there. Countries slowly closing their doors to people like Victoria as international pressure builds. Maybe one day, justice will finally catch up to her. Maybe one day, Grace will get to stand in a courtroom and watch the woman who took her mother away finally answer for everything she's done. But some days, I have to accept that maybe that day will never come. That some stories don't end with justice wrapped in a neat little bow. That sometimes, the person you love the most gets taken from you by someone who simply flies away and disappears into a world too big and too complicated to hold them accountable. What I've learned through all this pain is that love doesn't disappear just because a person does. Sophie is gone, but she's still here in every single thing I do for our daughter. She's here in the way Grace laughs, the way she stubbornly refuses to give up on anything, the same quiet strength her mother carried through every single terrible thing life threw at her. I lost the love of my life to someone else's hatred and jealousy. I lost her to a system too slow, too limited, too bound by borders to protect the people who need it most. But I refuse to let that loss turn into bitterness that poisons the rest of my life, because that's not what Sophie would have wanted, and it's certainly not the kind of father Grace deserves. Some nights, when the house is quiet and Grace is finally asleep, I sit by our bedroom window and I talk to Sophie like she can still hear me. I tell her about Grace's day. I tell her how much I still love her, even now, even after everything. And some nights, just for a moment, I swear I can almost feel her there beside me, the same warmth she always carried, still somehow finding a way to stay close, even from wherever she is now. If this story moved you, and I know it's a hard one, please take a moment to hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because these stories deserve to be heard, and so do the people who lived through them. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that even in the darkest, most unfair moments, love still matters, and grief is simply love with nowhere left to go. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think Victoria will ever face justice? I'll see you in the next story.